Welcome to Good Chats. I'm your host, Jenny Landon, and today we are going to be talking about gratitude and how we can use gratitude to heal. I chose this topic because as we're approaching the holidays, I know how difficult it can be to feel overwhelmed and stressed out and easily frustrated during a time that everyone is telling us that we should be feeling thankful. So today I have with me a couple of guest hosts who are here to share this topic with me. I have Levin, which I just said wrong, Levin, sorry. And he is the assistant principal in one of our St. Paul schools. And he is also the creator and host of the Depression Files. I also have with me today Angela Kittock. And she is a holistic health and life coach and the founder of Moondance Wellness Coaching. I want to thank both of you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So let's just jump right in. Tell me, how can embracing gratitude help us prepare for the holidays? Angela, do you want to jump in?
We live in a culture that's already so busy. We're always going, doing. When you add in the holidays, it's just this extra layer of busyness, this extra layer of stress. So I like the practice of gratitude at the holidays for two reasons. For one, like you said, it's supposed to be this time that's joyful and light and merry, but sometimes it's just stressful. Mm-hmm. So embracing the practice of gratitude this time of year, it's kind of our lifeline to joy. It's the thing that leads us back to these true, authentic moments of joy. And for two, it's a practice that can be very grounding. So all those times in our lives when things get extra busy, extra stressful, so especially the holidays, we need those practices that kind of help to lead us back to the present moment, that can allow us to ask, what is actually happening right now? What is good right now? Mm-hmm. So can lead us back to joy and can ground us so we don't just get lost in that whirlwind of busyness.
Nice. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Al, how about you?
Well, I think holidays have this expectation of being happy and fun, and a lot of times people are going through some really challenging times. In addition to the stressors of preparing for the holidays, there are people who have just recently lost a loved one, and it's their first holiday without them. And so there are lots of painful, difficult things at the times of the holidays. And if we can tap into what we are thankful for and what we are grateful for, then it gives us a sense of hope and a sense of moving forward in a positive way.
Absolutely. No, I lost my dad to suicide on June 2nd of 1999. But after doing a reflection paper for one of my teachers, I actually discovered that while my dad physically died in June, the man who I knew as my dad had died back in November. And so for several years after his death, Thanksgiving was an incredibly painful holiday for me because that was the holiday that I realized that my dad no longer existed. Like, his body was there and there was this shell of him, but the man that I knew, that spark in his eye, that wasn't there anymore. And I remember, as you said, that for people when they're experiencing the first holiday, I remember the first Thanksgiving after he died. I was in Southern California visiting my husband's grandparents, and just walking down a street crying and saying, how can I be here? How can I be thankful? My dad is gone, and I was so focused on that. It took me years before I could really understand gratitude and being thankful and even being thankful for difficult moments. Now, I know when we were preparing for this call, I was talking with both of you and about how gratitude has impacted each of your lives. And so, Al, let's start with you. I know this is an important topic for you. Why?
Well, for me, gratitude, I think, was an important step for me to overcome depression. I've had 2 bouts of major depression, and my second one was incredibly debilitating, and I had to leave work, and I checked myself into a partial hospitalization program. And I think gratitude was one thing that helped me along the way. It was the first time I started to journal regularly, and I journaled every single night while I was struggling my way through depression. And the end of each journal entry each night, I wrote in my journal, today, in order to work towards my recovery, I and then I had some bullet points, and sometimes it was as small as I got out of bed, or I read a book to my kid, or I made it to the partial hospitalization program. So it was really important for me to acknowledge, even though I didn't feel like I was moving forward, I was working at it, I was taking steps. So really being grateful for acknowledging that I was trying to move forward, and it really helped me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Angela, how about you? How has gratitude impacted your life?
Yeah, it's not a practice that kind of like naturally came to me that I had just naturally already connected with. I remember always very clearly this moment when I was around 29, like 6-ish years ago. I was standing at my kitchen sink doing dishes, and I remember just thinking, when did life become so heavy and difficult? And I was dealing with Crohn's disease, so I had a lot of health issues. Life just felt like one endless to-do list. I felt very disconnected from that experience of joy and lightness, freedom that we have as children, or that I remembered that I had as a child. So kind of accidentally, I ended up finding a life coach and hiring her, and one of the very first practices she had me do was start a gratitude journal. She called it a celebration journal. I would say it's very, very similar practice. That practice, along with other things I was doing, that practice really helped me to find the good in those moments. I started doing it at the end of each day right before I went to bed, so it was a really nice way to kind of review the day, pull out those little good bits, to go to bed with a calm, centered mind rather than that busy, anxious mind that we often have. And it was that thing that did help me find my way back to that experience of joy that I had remembered from childhood that as an adult can often feel very far away.
Nice. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, and I know for myself, as I said, it took me years to actually understand gratitude. And honestly, I grew up as the kid who was always unhappy. I never felt like I belonged where I grew up. I never, had a sense of self and an identity that I felt proud of. And I always felt disconnected from everyone. And I think learning gratitude has really shifted that for me. And one of the profound moments where gratitude became so important to me was actually I want to say it was 2012, that I just happened to be on Facebook and saw that someone had posted that basically they had left their goodbye letter and that they were going to die from suicide. And there was a search for this gentleman, and I didn't know him. A friend of mine had shared it and was reaching out to people, seeing if anybody knew where he was. And I was reading all of the comments on there, and several of the comments were shaming this gentleman. And as I read the comments, and I thought, oh my gosh, do you not understand that he already feels so guilty? He's already in so much pain. And by you pointing out what he's doing that's going to hurt his children or whatnot, it's not helping. And I went through a whole process of almost reliving what I went through when I lost my dad. And I suddenly had this moment of realizing that it was because of my dad that I'm alive today. It was his death that introduced me to acupuncture. And it was acupuncture that saved me after I experienced postpartum depression and had become suicidal. And it was because of him that my husband knew to take me serious when I told him that I was scared I was going to die. And all of a sudden it was this realization that one of the greatest blessings in my life was losing my dad to suicide. And I know that that's hard for a lot of people to hear when I say that, and they think, oh, you must not have loved your dad, or it couldn't have been that hard for you. No, it was incredibly painful for me. But what was interesting is after that, when I would experience difficult moments, sometimes months later, sometimes a year later, I would look back and I would go, wow, this is how I grew. This is what I learned. This is what it did for me. And for me, that's why it has become so important to recognize gratitude and to be in tune with the blessings in my life. And now it's gotten to where, because I do it so frequently, when I am in a crisis, when I am in a difficult moment, I can almost instantly know what it is I'm thankful for, which has had a profound effect on how I then respond to the situation. I know as you were talking, as we were preparing, and we talked about the journaling, and I had mentioned how overwhelming and daunting that task can be. Angela, why don't you tell us? I know you talked about it a little bit already with your journaling. That wasn't something that came natural to you. What would you say is kind of the best way for someone to maybe start that process?
Yeah, I think an important thing to remember is to keep it really simple. Like you had mentioned too, like it can feel so overwhelming and daunting. And so some of the things that can help to make it really simple are think about keeping it small and short. And so small, I brought some of the actual journals that I've used. And these are little itty bitty ones. I don't know if you can tell how small they are, but just a little one. Because when you open a big notebook page, it's super daunting. You're supposed to fill up this whole thing with all these things you're grateful for. So I like to keep it physically small. You can fill up a page with one long run-on sentence, a couple bullet points. You could draw a picture. And also keeping it small in terms of what you're writing down, that it doesn't have to be some huge thing you're grateful for. Like you said, you wrote down the things you did each day, and they can be really small, or it could be something as small as it's like a crummy winter day, but the sun came out, and how nice was that? Or that you reconnected with an old friend who sent you a text message. Just like pulling out those small things to capture. And then keeping it short, that it only has to take 5 minutes, and it doesn't have to be like this new hobby that you're going to be really passionate about and it's going to take all your time. I kind of like to think of it, like I had mentioned at one point to you earlier, like a hygiene, like a baseline of hygiene. And a good comparison is what we do with our physical hygiene. Before we go to bed, we don't even think about this anymore. What do? We brush our teeth, wash our face, use the toilet, go to bed. It takes like 5 minutes. So what if you added on 5 minutes and you got into bed and you grabbed your journal and you spent 5 minutes writing down bullet points, one sentence, whatever, what you're grateful for from that day. And it's kind of like your baseline of mental, emotional, spiritual hygiene. So helping to support your health in that way too. And with time, hopefully it's that thing that becomes a habit that you don't have to think about the way you just brush your teeth every night, 5 minutes and it's done. And then we had talked about too, when we were talking about journaling, the idea of a gratitude jar came up too. So I know we all know what a jar is, but just to, we're really talking about like a jar here, and you could use little Post-it notes, scraps of paper, write one thing on there, drop it into the jar each day. What's cool about this is you get that visual reminder. Starting at empty, you're filling up the jar with the gratitude. It's kind of that cool metaphor that we're filling up ourselves with gratitude, our own vessel too. So it can be cool if you're more of a visual learner too, that actual physical reminder.
I know I still go to a support group for men with depression and anxiety, and at one point they passed out a jar to each of us along with little strips of paper, and the same type of deal. It wasn't overwhelming, it wasn't a huge piece of paper. Fill out the small slip, you fill the jar, and they reminded us too that if you're really struggling one day, crack the jar open and pull one out and remember what you're grateful for. I think particularly when you're going through depression, it's difficult to really acknowledge things that you are grateful for because it feels like there's nothing to be grateful for at times.
Right, yeah. Yeah, which I think that's where, when you talked about the things that you're writing down, it was like, these are the little steps I took today, right? And even if you didn't recognize it necessarily in that moment as gratitude, it was, I accomplished this, I got it done.
Right.
And I think that's great. And Al, I know you've got little ones. I have not so little ones, but they're still at home with me. I love the idea of doing a jar that's visual where you are writing the notes and you're dropping them in there because, when you do have some kind of family meltdown and kind of just need a way to like pause, reset, remind people why we're here together, like being able to just go and pull out one of those notes and see, and I guess you could leave it anonymous or you can even write like, whether it was one of my kids wrote it or my husband, but being able to see those from everyone, not just yourself, I think could be really a powerful family gratitude jar. Could be really cool.
Yeah, that reminds me of something that we do at our school is we have a sunshine committee who is, concerned about the staff morale and keeping that up. And in the staff lounge, they created an appreciation station. And there are pieces of paper for people to just jot down notes about, I appreciate, Jenny for helping me out the other day with, whatever. And it's really important that it lifts people up because they know they're being recognized for their good work and kindness.
Yeah, I think that's great. So yeah, whether you're using it at home with your family or you're using it in your work environment, because I think that is one thing that we are seeing the depression rate increase, the suicide rate increase, and we need to be addressing our mental health and showing appreciation, especially at work. I mean, we spend so much time in the work environment. We leave our household, we leave our family, and we go and devote all this time. And we need to know that that space is a space where you're appreciated, where you want to be there, you know? And I think a lot of times it's become just a place where you show up, you get your work done, and you leave. It's a bit of a disconnect.
Yeah.
And so I think bringing in something like this could be really helpful for if you're a business leader, and even if you're not, and you just have the ability to implement this within your workplace, I think it could be a really great tool.
It's a huge morale booster, I think.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I know that we've talked too about, I mentioned, learning like that gratitude out of such a difficult time, and how that opens us up to being able to handle other situations in the future. I know, Angela, you had mentioned kind of the yin and yang concept of gratitude.
Yeah.
Why don't you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that symbol that we're probably all familiar with, that yin yang or yin yang, it's kind of half white, half black. In the white, there's a little speck of black. In the black, there's a little speck of white. And it's kind of just another like cool metaphor, visual reminder of that idea that even in the darkest times, there is that speck of light. It's kind of that lifeline again that reminds us that nothing's all entirely dark. We can take that moment to try to capture that one tiny speck of light that's somewhere in there. And then kind of the flip-flop, when things feel really light, like maybe the holidays, a time when it's, at least on the surface, very merry and light and joyful, but maybe we're not feeling that. Maybe we're feeling low or depressed or anxious, kind of that reminder that it's okay and totally normal and natural to be feeling both at the same time, that nothing's entirely all light or entirely all dark. Kind of that helpful reminder.
Right.
Yeah, I like that visual.
One piece that really resonated with me was when you talked about your dad dying by suicide and how you actually gained some insight from that and found it, that there were pieces you grew from. And I realized, my major depression, I always say really honestly, I would never wish it upon my worst enemy, but there are definitely pieces about going through depression that I am now grateful for. I wouldn't have been able to say it at the time, but after having gone through it, it's essentially changed the trajectory of my life, and I'm able to empathize with people going through challenging times. I'm able to recognize it in employees. I'm able, I do the advocacy work that I'm incredibly passionate about. So it really changed my trajectory of what I'm doing and what I'm passionate about in life.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
I can say I feel the same exact way about a different experience, but that was the most challenging experience of my life with Crohn's disease, that I had that same exact, like you've both said, of realizing kind of in retrospect that the most challenging thing in your life is the thing you end up being the most grateful for, that idea that people say it's kind of a blessing in disguise, that it kind of is hard maybe to notice it when it's happening, but in retrospect you look back, and I almost think of my life in terms of like pre-Crohn's and post-Crohn's, and even though you have all those challenging moments and difficult times, I wouldn't go back and exchange it to not have that, because it was the catalyst, the thing that led me to a different experience of my life and a richer experience of my life, and I wouldn't want to not have that experience, so.
And I think that, we all are able to look at it and go, I experienced this difficult time in my life, and I am better for it. But then you have other people out there, and I was this person, at one point, that I was just so angry at the situation. And so I think a part of it is that gratitude also, it allows us, when we're able to really tune into it, it allows us to forgive and to let go of anger and to really focus on the positive aspects of our life. And I know, so when it comes to, again, the holidays, and often we're spending time with family and friends, and ideally with people who we genuinely like. For me, growing up, unfortunately, that's not what the holidays were like. Unfortunately, I came from a family, my mom's side of the family were sexual predators and were not good people. And every holiday, and as a child, I didn't understand it. But every holiday was fighting and police getting called and someone ending up in the hospital. And there were some really difficult times. I hope if you're watching this that it's not that bad or it's not worse. But I think everyone can relate to having to be in a space with someone that you don't necessarily want to be with, or someone that maybe you love but you're having a difficult time with. And I've learned recently, even in just trying to assist my daughter through some difficult times, a psychotherapist that I worked with suggested that when you're having a difficult day, one of the best things you can do is sit down and write out the things about that person that you love. And it's really the things that you're grateful for. And that the more that you write down what you love about the person, the more you're going to see that in them. And I don't know if that's some kind of voodoo that it actually changes their behavior or if it just changes my perception. But I have found, we started doing that in the spring, and I have found that it has made a huge difference on the days. What would you guys say, helps you get through some difficult moments, or if you're working with someone that could be trying or difficult, or you're living with someone that could be difficult? What would you say has been helpful for you?
For me, I think it's that idea of, and this is one of those things that can be so challenging when we're dealing with someone difficult, but so transformational, where gratitude can come in and be very transformational. That idea of seeing difficult people and situations as our teachers and being able to thank them. And it doesn't have to be like a thank you to your face. It's more for you, like an internal that you're able to forgive and thinking that they're there to teach you some important lesson that pushes you towards some growth, something that pushes you into some expanded, fuller version of yourself, of your life. I think that's a lot of what we're here on this earth to learn, is some important lessons that we needed to learn, and sometimes we're gently nudged, and sometimes we're uncomfortably and annoyingly pushed into that lesson or growth. And I think that can be really helpful, and has been helpful for me, thinking that I can kind of say thank you for teaching me this lesson that I needed to learn to assist in my growth.
Nice.
For me, if it's at least not in the moment, I do like journaling and thinking about the situation and how I want to address it, and really kind of thinking in their perspective as well. And I also appreciate the point that you both had talked about forgiveness, and I think it's so important to have forgiveness, and it's so important for the one holding on to the anger to let go and have the forgiveness, more so than the person you're forgiving, right? Because holding on to that anger really is not helpful at all.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I was in a really difficult situation when we were living in Memphis at one point, and I, up to this point, had always said what was ever on my mind. Right, it was like, you did me wrong, I'm going to tell you what you did and tell you all the reasons why I'm never going to speak to you again. And for the first time ever, I didn't do that. And I just kind of kept my mouth shut and went along for the ride and showed up when I needed to show up and left and never said anything. And at one point, this person who had really wronged me, she came up to me about 6 months later, and she hugged me in this incredible embrace. And she said, "I miss you so much, and I love you." And I wanted to tell her off so bad, right? She really had. She had wronged me, and we don't have time to go into all the details of that story, but it was really painful what she had done to me. But in that moment, I looked at her as she pulled away from me, and I said, "Thank you." And then I walked away. I didn't feel this weird urge to say I love you too, or I miss you too. And she was someone who I think I do love, but I've learned to love her from a distance. And I did miss what we had once been. But I also, that trust was gone. I had learned my lesson. But that ability to just say to her, "Thank you," was such incredible closure for me. And I did say it out loud. And then I walked away with my head held high. I didn't chew her out. I didn't say everything that I wanted to, but it was the most incredible feeling.
So you were able to let go of any anger or bitterness you may have felt?
Yeah.
Right.
And I'll be honest with you, I felt like I won. I know it's not a competition, but I kind of felt like I won.
Right.
So as we're getting ready to close up, we've got a few minutes. I want to ask, what is one thing that you would say you're grateful for? I know we've already talked about like the big thing, but like kind of what is something that may take people by surprise that you're grateful for?
I guess I could say, yeah, aside from the big thing, I mean, this is still a big thing, but I'm really grateful for my spouse. And I found gratitude to be a really important practice there too. I think if we look at marriages and long-term relationships as kind of a gift, that this is one of our greatest teachers, no matter how wonderful they are at pushing our buttons or, the things that we can do to frustrate each other, that I've really found the practice of gratitude to be super helpful there too. Being thankful for one of our greatest teachers in our lives.
Absolutely, for sure. Yeah.
A couple have come to mind for me, and one is my family. I have 4 little kids who are just amazing, and I learn from them all the time, and I'm really grateful for what they give me. Yeah. And my wife, of course, as well, who lets me do my mental health advocacy while I work full-time and everything else. And so she's wonderful, and I'm very grateful for that as well. And then in addition to that, I just think of like my greatest mentors in my work, and the last principal who I worked for, Dr. Brian Bass, was phenomenal and just grew me as a leader, but I also believe grew me as a person, and I'm really, really grateful for that.
Yeah, we need more of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, both of you. I love both of your answers. And, as I think about who I am today and the life that I live, I would say that one of the things I am most grateful for would be my husband and children, right? And they can drive me crazy, and there's days that I think I'm walking out the door. Oh my gosh. But honestly, I wouldn't be who I am today. I don't think I would have learned forgiveness, and I don't think I would have learned the level of compassion or even really what it means to fight for someone that you love without them in my life. And I'll also say like that, one of the things that I am incredibly grateful for even is the fact that this may sound totally out there, but the fact that I was abused as a child. Because I will tell you, I am one fierce mama bear, and I believe I am that. I am protective, and I will do whatever it takes to protect my children. And I think that is just such a strong instinct in me because of what I endured as a child. I want to thank both of you for being here and sharing your experiences and your insights on gratitude. I also want to thank our sponsors, especially Kowalski's in Shoreview and Dog Dessert Construction. I also want to say a special thank you to Evereve in Roseville. I had the pleasure of working with Jenny, who put together this amazing outfit for me tonight. I also want to thank the incredible crew here at CTV North Suburbs. We would not be able to do this show without them. They are absolutely amazing. Thank you to our studio audience and everyone viewing this from home. Until next time, be good to yourself and to others.